Vincent Hart came back at 11:47 p.m., confident, unannounced, and certain of one thing: the door would still open for him. 6 months earlier, he had walked out of the Manhattan apartment with a leather duffel and a careless promise to clear his head. He left behind a quiet wife, a sleeping child, and a life he assumed would stay paused until he returned. Now, standing in the hallway with city lights flickering through the glass walls, Vincent adjusted his coat and exhaled like a man reclaiming property. The apartment was too quiet. No music, no television, no questions waiting to be asked. Savannah Cole Hart sat at the dining table, her back straight, hands folded, a single lamp casting a calm, deliberate circle of light. She did not look surprised. She did not stand. She did not smile. On the table beside her was a slim black folder and a phone turned face down. Vincent laughed softly, the sound familiar and dismissive. "You're still up," he said, as if that alone proved everything was fine. "We need to talk." Savannah finally looked at him. Her expression wasn't angry. That unsettled him more than tears ever could. From the hallway, a small figure appeared. Ethan. Their 9-year-old son stood barefoot on the hardwood floor, holding a worn backpack against his chest. He didn't run forward. He didn't ask where Vincent had been. He only looked at his father for a moment, then looked away. That silence landed harder than any accusation. Before Vincent could speak again, the door behind him opened. A woman stepped in, composed, silver-haired, carrying a briefcase that had no business being in a family home at midnight. She nodded once, polite and professional. "Good evening, Mr. Hart," she said. "I'm here on behalf of your wife." Vincent's smile faded. Savannah pushed the folder forward, just enough for him to see the first page. Divorce petition, asset disclosure, filed. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ending. For 6 months, Savannah Cole Hart said nothing. She did not call Vincent when his side of the closet stayed empty. She did not text when the credit card he controlled stopped working without explanation. She did not ask why his name disappeared from their shared calendar, like he had erased himself on purpose. Silence became her armor, not because she was weak, but because she was watching. Every morning she woke before dawn, long before Manhattan began to stir. She brewed coffee in the dark, careful not to wake Ethan, and sat at the kitchen counter with her old MacBook open, reviewing numbers that no longer belonged to her, yet still told her the truth. Vincent had taught her to rely on him. He never imagined she was trained to read what men like him tried to hide. During the day, Savannah became invisible. She walked Ethan to school, smiled politely at other parents, and nodded when neighbors asked where her husband had been. "Traveling," she said. That word covered everything. At night, after Ethan slept, she opened a slim notebook and wrote dates, transfers, shell accounts, and inconsistencies. She didn't know yet what she would do with them. She only knew she couldn't forget. The hardest nights were not the lonely ones. They were the ordinary ones. When Ethan asked why his father hadn't called. When he left a drawing on the table folded carefully, waiting for a man who never came. Savannah learned to answer without poisoning her child's heart. "Your dad has his own storms," she said once. Ethan nodded, older than his years. Vincent's life, meanwhile, continued loudly elsewhere. His name appeared in articles, photos surfaced online, him beside a model in hotel lobbies, champagne glasses raised, smiles effortless. Savannah saw none of it directly. She didn't need to. The financial trails told her more than gossip ever could. One evening, after weeks of hesitation, Savannah visited a quiet Park Avenue office recommended by someone she trusted but barely knew. She didn't cry there. She didn't vent. She laid facts on the table, one by one. The woman across from her listened without interrupting, then said, "You waited long enough to protect yourself." That was the moment Savannah stopped surviving and started preparing. She still loved once. She still hurt, but she no longer hoped. Hope had been replaced by something steadier. Vincent Hart told himself he was finally breathing. Los Angeles felt lighter than Manhattan. The air, the conversations, the expectations. There were no questions about where he was going or when he would be home. No quiet child watching him from the hallway. No wife who knew how to read the pauses in his voice. With Lila Monroe on his arm, life became simple again, at least on the surface. They stayed in hotels with white sheets that never wrinkled, and lobbies that smelled faintly of citrus and money. Vincent learned to smile for cameras, learned which angles made him look younger, learned how to perform happiness the way investors performed confidence. Lila was good at that world. She understood when to laugh, when to stay silent, when to reach for his hand just as someone important walked by. At dinners, she talked about runway shows and brand deals. Vincent talked about markets and expansion. They never talked about consequences. At night, when the room finally went quiet, Vincent lay awake staring at the ceiling, his phone face down on the nightstand. He told himself not checking messages was discipline, not avoidance. Savannah would call if something was wrong. She always had. The silence, he decided, meant she was waiting. Lila sensed the distance, but misread it. She thought it was depth. Men like Vincent, she believed, always carried secrets. It made them powerful. She posted photos carefully, never tagging locations, never posting too much at once. Vincent liked that. It felt controlled, safe. What neither of them acknowledged was the way Vincent drank more at night, or how often he checked his accounts with a tight jaw. Money was moving, but not the way he expected. Transfers lagged. Approvals took longer. He blamed assistants, blamed banks, blamed timing. Once, over room service champagne, Lila asked casually, "So, are you divorced?" Vincent smiled without answering. "It's complicated," he said, and she let it go. Models learned early which questions closed doors. The illusion began to crack in small ways. A deal fell through. A colleague stopped returning calls. A charity fund Vincent used for tax maneuvering asked for documentation he couldn't immediately produce. He told himself it was nothing. It was always nothing, until it wasn't. One morning, Vincent woke to sunlight and an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest. For the first time, the thought crossed his mind uninvited. Savannah might not be waiting, and for reasons he didn't yet understand. That terrified him more than losing everything else. Ethan Hart asked the question on a Tuesday morning, the kind of ordinary day that usually passed without leaving a mark. Savannah was tying his shoelaces near the door, her fingers moving automatically, when Ethan spoke in a careful voice that sounded older than 9. "Mom," he said, not looking at her, "is Dad coming back? Or is he gone for real?" The words stopped her hands. Savannah had prepared for many things during the past 6 months. Court filings, financial traps, long nights of fear, but not this. Not the moment when silence would no longer protect her child. She took a breath, slow and controlled, the way she had taught herself to do when panic tried to rise. She didn't lie. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But whatever happens, you're not losing your family." Ethan nodded, absorbing the answer in the quiet way children did when they sensed truth underneath. He slipped his backpack on and walked to the door, then paused. "If he does come back," he added, "will he stay this time?" Savannah felt something break inside her, small but sharp. She crouched so they were eye level. "That part," she said gently, "won't be your job to worry about." At school drop-off, Ethan didn't run toward his friends like he used to. He walked slowly, shoulders slightly hunched, carrying more weight than he should have. Savannah watched until he disappeared inside the building, then stayed there a moment longer than necessary, steadying herself against the cold metal railing. The rest of the day moved forward anyway. Laundry needed folding, emails needed answering. Life did not pause for heartbreak. That evening, Ethan spread his homework across the dining table. Savannah cooked dinner while he worked quietly, unusually focused. When he finished, he slid a folded paper toward her. "It's for Dad," he said. Savannah unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing of 3 figures holding hands. One of them was smaller than the others. Above them, in uneven letters, Ethan had written, "Please don't leave again." Savannah swallowed hard. "Do you want me to send it to him?" Ethan hesitated. "No," he said after a moment. "I want him to see it if he comes home." That night, after Ethan slept, Savannah sat alone at the table with the drawing beside her. The city hummed beyond the windows, indifferent and bright. For the first time in months, anger surfaced, not loud, not explosive, but steady. Vincent hadn't just abandoned her. He had left a child waiting. And Savannah knew then that whatever came next could no longer be about survival alone. It had to be about protection. Savannah made the call at night after Ethan was asleep and the apartment had settled into its familiar hush. She sat at the dining table with her laptop closed in front of her, phone in hand, staring at a number she had saved weeks ago but never dialed. Outside the windows, the Manhattan skyline glowed with the confidence of a city that never doubted itself. Savannah wished she felt the same. For months she had survived by staying quiet, by observing, by enduring. But Ethan's drawing still lay folded beside her plate, its edges soft from being handled too many times. It was no longer enough to simply hold things together. She needed to change the balance. When the line connected, a calm female voice answered. "This is Rebecca Sloan." Savannah swallowed. "My name is Savannah Hart. You said if I ever felt cornered, I should call." There was a pause, brief, deliberate. "Are you safe right now?" the woman asked. "Yes," Savannah replied. "But I won't be if I keep pretending nothing is happening." Rebecca listened without interrupting as Savannah explained. The controlled finances, the unexplained account movements, the 6-month absence disguised as freedom. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't have to. Facts carried their own weight. When Savannah finished, the silence on the other end felt heavier than before. "You've been very patient," Rebecca finally said. "That patience may have saved you." They spoke for nearly an hour, not about revenge, about preparation, about timing, about what could and could not be proven without putting a child in the middle. Rebecca asked careful questions, dates, amounts, access points. Savannah answered each one, surprised by how much she already knew. "You understand," Savannah said quietly. "I don't want to destroy him. I just want my son safe." "That," Rebecca replied, "is exactly why we'll do this correctly." Before the call ended, Rebecca gave her one instruction. Do nothing differently. Let him believe he still controls the pace. People make their biggest mistakes when they think they're winning. Savannah ended the call and sat very still. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. For the first time since Vincent left, she felt something solid beneath her fear. A plan. Not one fueled by anger, but by inevitability. She folded Ethan's drawing once more and placed it carefully inside a drawer with the documents she had been quietly gathering. The city lights flickered outside, indifferent as ever, but inside the apartment something had shifted. Vincent believed silence meant surrender. He had no idea it meant strategy. Savannah had learned long ago that men like Vincent underestimated quiet women. They mistook patience for ignorance, loyalty for blindness, marriage for ownership. Before she ever became Vincent Hart's wife, Savannah had built a career in corporate compliance, the kind of work that trained you to notice what others ignored. Inconsistencies, patterns, money that moved too smoothly to be innocent. When she stepped back from that world to raise Ethan, Vincent assumed she had stepped away from her mind as well. He was wrong. During the first month of his absence, Savannah discovered it by accident. A routine login, an old access credential Vincent had forgotten to revoke. She hadn't gone looking for secrets. She had only wanted to understand why the household account suddenly froze, while Vincent's lifestyle online looked more expensive than ever. What she found was not a single betrayal, but a system. Charity-linked shell accounts, delayed disclosures, transfers routed through entities designed to look dormant. It was subtle enough to pass casual audits, but sloppy enough for someone trained to read intent instead of labels. Vincent had grown careless. He believed no one at home was watching. Savannah didn't confront him. She didn't even react. She took screenshots, logged timestamps, saved metadata. She learned when to stop, when not to trigger alerts. Every night after Ethan slept, she worked quietly, her laptop casting a pale glow over the kitchen counter while the city breathed outside. There were moments fear nearly broke her. Moments when she imagined Vincent discovering what she knew and turning ruthless. She thought about credit freezes, legal threats, the way power shifted when money did. That fear taught her discipline. She never copied everything at once. She never accessed the same file twice in a row. She learned Vincent's habits better than he knew them himself. The truth was heavier than she expected. Not just infidelity, but exposure. Vincent wasn't simply reckless with his marriage. He was reckless with his empire. And people like that always assumed consequences were for other men. One night, Savannah closed her laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to Ethan's breathing through the wall. She understood then that knowledge alone was not power. Timing was. Protection was. Knowing when to stay silent and when to step forward. That was why she hadn't moved yet, why she still let Vincent believe he was free, why she still let him think she had nothing. Savannah didn't need revenge. She needed the truth to land when it could no longer be denied. And Vincent, unaware, was walking straight toward it. Lila Monroe noticed the change before Vincent did. At first, it was small. Vincent checked his phone more often but smiled less when he did. He canceled a dinner in Beverly Hills without explanation. He stopped talking about timelines and started talking about pressure, a word men like him used when control began slipping. Lila had learned to read men early in her career. Designers, agents, investors, they all shared the same tells when something no longer bent to their will. Vincent was no different. One afternoon, sunlight spilling across the hotel suite, Lila sat cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through contracts, while Vincent paced near the window. She watched his reflection instead of his face. "You've been distant," she said lightly, not accusing, just curious. Did something happen in New York? Vincent waved a hand, dismissive. Just noise. It'll pass. But noise didn't freeze accounts. Noise didn't make powerful people avoid eye contact. Lila closed her laptop. I need to know where this is going, she said. I turned down work for this. People are asking questions. That made Vincent stop. He turned slowly, irritation flashing before he smoothed it away. You're doing fine, he said. Better than fine. That's not an answer, Lila replied. Her voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. I don't need promises. I need clarity. Vincent studied her, calculating. For months, Lila had been easy, beautiful, supportive, undemanding. He hadn't planned for her to want anything real. My marriage is complicated, he said carefully, but I'm handling it. Lila smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You said that 3 months ago. That night she posted nothing. No photos, no stories. The silence was deliberate. Vincent noticed, felt the absence like a bruise. Public visibility had always been part of the arrangement, even if neither of them admitted it out loud. 2 days later, Lila received an email from her management. A contract payment was delayed. Again. Vincent had promised to smooth it out. This time the excuse didn't land. Lila didn't confront him immediately. She did her own research. Names. LLCs. Connections that led back to Vincent in ways she hadn't expected. By the time she asked to talk again, she wasn't asking for affection. She was asking for answers. Vincent still thought he was in control. He didn't realize the woman he treated like an accessory had begun to see the cracks. And unlike Savannah, Lila wasn't bound by history. She was bound by self-preservation. The documents arrived on a Thursday morning, sealed in a plain envelope that looked ordinary enough to be ignored. Savannah didn't open it right away. She set it on the kitchen counter and went about her routine, making Ethan's breakfast, checking his backpack, reminding him about spelling practice. Life still needed structure, especially now. Only after the door closed behind her son did she return to the envelope, standing very still, as if it might bite. Inside were drafts, legal language, pages that translated 6 months of restraint into consequences. Asset freezes, custody safeguards, contingency filings. Nothing dramatic on the surface, yet every sentence carried weight. This was the moment she had been working toward, and the moment she feared most. Savannah sat down, hands folded in her lap, and stared at the pages. Signing them meant accepting that the life she once defended was already gone. It meant there would be no quiet reconciliation, no apology strong enough to rewind time. It meant she would no longer be reacting. She would be deciding. Her phone buzzed. A message from Vincent, casual and perfectly timed. Landing tonight. We should talk. Savannah closed her eyes. For a brief, dangerous second, doubt crept in. She imagined Vincent walking through the door, remorseful, promising change. She imagined Ethan's drawing finally being seen. She imagined relief. Then she remembered the nights Ethan waited, the accounts that vanished, the silence that taught her everything words never did. Savannah picked up a pen. It felt heavier than it should have. She read every page carefully, marking questions, pausing when fear tightened her chest. She called Rebecca once, voice steady but quiet. They spoke about risk, about exposure, about what Vincent would likely do once he realized control had shifted. You don't have to sign today, Rebecca said. I know, Savannah replied, but I should. When she finished, Savannah placed her signature where indicated. Once, Twice. Again. Each stroke felt final and strangely grounding, as if she were anchoring herself to reality. She didn't feel triumph. She felt resolve. That evening she cooked dinner as usual. She listened to Ethan talk about his day. She tucked him into bed and kissed his forehead, lingering just a second longer. When she returned to the living room, the signed documents rested neatly in her bag. Vincent believed his return would reset everything. Savannah knew better. By the time he walked through the door, the rules would already be written. And this time, they weren't his. Vincent planned his return the way he planned everything else, methodically, with confidence, and just enough charm to make people forget what came before. On the flight back to New York, he stared out the window at the clouds, rehearsing the version of himself he intended to present. Calm, regretful, but not desperate, in control. He told himself Savannah would be relieved to see him. 6 months was long enough to prove his independence, short enough to reclaim his place. He sent the text mid-air, casual on purpose. "Landing tonight, we should talk." No response came, but that didn't worry him. Savannah had always gone quiet when she was emotional. He mistook silence for predictability. When the car pulled up outside the building, Vincent adjusted his coat and glanced up at the familiar windows. Manhattan looked the same as ever. Sharp lines, expensive lights. A city that rewarded men who knew how to take. He tipped the driver without thinking and stepped inside, nodding to the doorman like nothing had changed. In the elevator, he checked his reflection. Tired, maybe. Still impressive. He imagined Ethan running toward him, imagined Savannah standing nearby, guarded but hopeful. He practiced his opening line. "I messed up, but I'm here now." The door opened onto the apartment hallway, and the first thing Vincent noticed was the stillness. No movement, no background noise. It felt staged, like a room waiting for a performance. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting his keys down deliberately. "I'm home," he called out, his voice light. Savannah sat at the dining table, exactly where he'd last seen her in his memory. Calm, composed, not rushing to him. That was unexpected, but manageable. "What's with the serious face?" he asked, forcing a smile. "We don't need lawyers for this." That was when he noticed the folder. Black, neat, positioned precisely between them like a boundary. Before he could ask, Ethan appeared in the hallway. Vincent opened his arms instinctively, but the boy didn't move. He only watched, eyes cautious, as if measuring a stranger. Something in Vincent's chest tightened. Then the front door opened behind him. A woman entered, confident, unhurried, carrying a briefcase Vincent recognized too late. She met his gaze without hostility, without apology. "Mr. Hart," she said evenly. "We should begin." Vincent turned back to Savannah, the practiced speech collapsing in his throat. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning he hadn't prepared for. The room did not erupt the way Vincent expected. There was no shouting, no accusations flying like broken glass, no emotional collapse he could manage or dismiss. Instead, there was silence, thick, deliberate, and terrifying in its restraint. Rebecca Sloane set her briefcase down on the table with measured calm and opened it, laying out documents in precise order. Vincent watched her hands, not the papers, as if looking away from the words might undo them. "These are preliminary filings," Rebecca said evenly. "Divorce, custody protections, and a temporary financial injunction. You'll have your opportunity to respond. Tonight is not that time." Vincent laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "This is absurd," he said, turning to Savannah. "You don't blindside someone like this. We're married." Savannah met his eyes without flinching. "We were," she replied. That word, were, landed harder than anything else. Vincent stepped closer, lowering his voice, trying familiarity like a weapon. "You're emotional," he said. "Let's not do this in front of Ethan." At the sound of his name, Ethan shifted slightly in the hallway. He didn't come forward. He didn't hide. He simply watched, backpack still slung over one shoulder, like a child ready to leave a place that no longer felt safe. "I waited for you," Ethan said quietly. The words were small, but they cut deep. Vincent froze. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No argument he'd ever made prepared him for that sentence. Savannah felt the moment pass through her like a current. She didn't rush to explain. She didn't comfort Vincent. She placed a hand gently on Ethan's shoulder instead, grounding him, anchoring herself. Rebecca continued, her voice steady. "Mr. Hart, your access to joint accounts is suspended pending review. Any attempt to move assets will be documented." Vincent's composure cracked. "You think you can take everything from me?" he snapped. Savannah shook her head slowly. "I'm not taking anything," she said. "I'm stopping you from taking more." For the first time, Vincent looked around the apartment and saw what he'd missed: the careful order, the quiet strength, the child who no longer ran toward him. This wasn't rebellion. It was preparation. Rebecca gathered her papers. "We'll be in touch," she said. As the door closed behind her, Vincent stood alone in the middle of the room, the weight of consequences finally settling. Savannah didn't feel victorious. She felt finished. And for the first time in months, that was enough. Vincent didn't leave right away. After Rebecca Sloane stepped out and the door closed behind her, the apartment felt suspended in time, like a place waiting to decide what it would become. Vincent stood near the table, hands clenched, eyes moving from Savannah to Ethan and back again, searching for something familiar he could still claim. "This doesn't have to be permanent," he said finally, his voice lower now. "People make mistakes. We can fix this." Savannah didn't answer. She was packing Ethan's overnight bag with quiet efficiency. Pajamas, toothbrush, the worn backpack he insisted on carrying everywhere. Every movement was deliberate, calm, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her head long before it arrived. Vincent followed her into the hallway. "You're really doing this?" he asked. Walking out instead of talking. Savannah paused, turning just enough to face him. "We talked for years," she said evenly. "You just weren't listening." Ethan waited by the door, eyes fixed on the floor. Vincent crouched slightly, trying to meet his son's gaze. "Buddy," he said, softening his tone, "we'll have time together. This is just complicated adult stuff." Ethan looked up then, his expression serious. "You always said that," he replied. "And then you left." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Vincent straightened, something like panic flickering across his face. "Savannah," he said sharply, "don't poison him against me." She stepped between them without raising her voice. "No one poisoned anything," she said. "Children notice what adults try to hide." Outside, the city hummed. Sirens in the distance, late-night traffic, the sound of lives continuing whether this one survived or not. Savannah took Ethan's hand and opened the door. Vincent stood frozen, watching them step into the hallway. For the first time, it wasn't anger that gripped him. It was fear. The kind that came when a door closed and didn't reopen. "We'll be in touch through counsel," Savannah said, not unkindly. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Vincent alone in the apartment. He looked around at the carefully arranged furniture, the framed photos still on the wall, the silence pressing in from all sides. Everything looked the same, but nothing belonged to him anymore. As Savannah and Ethan descended, she felt the weight of the night settle into her bones. Not exhaustion, not relief, but resolve. This wasn't escape. It was the beginning of something irreversible. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of that at all. Morning came without mercy. Savannah woke before the alarm, the gray light of dawn slipping through the curtains of the small hotel room she and Ethan had checked into the night before. The city outside was already moving, unaware that her life had crossed a line it would never return from. For a moment, she lay still, listening to Ethan's steady breathing, grounding herself in the quiet. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. One message became 5. 5 became dozens. By the time she sat up, the silence Vincent had relied on was gone. A financial blog had posted first, something vague about internal irregularities at Vincent Hart's fund. Within an hour, industry group chats picked it up. By 8:30, Savannah saw his name trending in a corner of the news feed she rarely looked at. Not scandal yet. Suspicion. Questions. The kind that never stopped once they started. Savannah didn't smile. She poured coffee into a paper cup and stared out at the street below. This wasn't victory. It was exposure. And exposure was unpredictable. At 9 o'clock, Rebecca Sloan called. "They've frozen more than expected," Rebecca said calmly. "Not just personal accounts, several operational ones." Someone panicked. Savannah closed her eyes. Vincent. "He's been calling," Rebecca continued. "Your attorney will handle communication. Do not respond directly." "I won't," Savannah said. Her voice was steady, even as her heart raced. "What about custody?" "You're protected," Rebecca replied. "And so is Ethan." That mattered more than anything else. When Ethan woke, Savannah kept the morning normal. Breakfast, a joke about the city noise, a promise to walk in the park later. Children didn't need to carry adult consequences. Across town, Vincent was discovering how quickly control evaporated. Calls went unanswered, meetings were postponed. A partner sent a brief message that said only, "We need to talk, immediately." By noon, Savannah's email filled with notifications she didn't open. She wasn't curious, she knew enough. What struck her most was not relief, but clarity. The world hadn't ended. It hadn't even slowed down. The only thing that had changed was who was no longer protected by silence. Savannah took Ethan's hand and stepped back into the city. For the first time, the noise didn't feel overwhelming. It felt honest. The meeting was scheduled for 40 minutes. It ended in 12. Vincent sat at the long glass table in a midtown conference room, jacket draped over the chair he no longer bothered to wear. Across from him were 2 partners, a compliance officer, and a legal advisor he had hired years ago to protect him from problems exactly like this. No one looked impressed. The screen at the end of the room displayed numbers Vincent had seen hundreds of times before. Today, they looked different. Not wrong. Exposed. "This isn't about optics anymore," one partner said carefully. "It's about liability." Vincent leaned forward. "You're overreacting." "This is a domestic dispute that bled into timing issues." The legal advisor shook his head. "No, this crossed a regulatory threshold last night." A document slid across the table toward Vincent. He recognized it immediately. Asset freeze notice. Temporary, but aggressive. 7 figures, inaccessible. "You can't do this," Vincent said flatly. "I built this firm." "And that's why we're acting," the compliance officer replied. "To keep it from collapsing." Vincent stood abruptly. "This is because of my wife," he snapped. "She's manipulating the system." Silence followed. "Your wife," the advisor said evenly, "didn't create those transfers. She documented them." That was the moment Vincent understood something fundamental had shifted. Savannah hadn't attacked him. She had stepped aside and let gravity do the rest. By the time he left the building, his phone buzzed with a notification from his personal attorney. Settlement draft attached. Vincent opened it on the sidewalk, ignoring the flow of people around him. The numbers hit first. A clean division, no theatrics, no public humiliation. A 7-figure separation structured to close doors quietly. But the clause that stopped his breath wasn't financial. Full custody, primary residence awarded to Savannah Cole Hart. He laughed once, hollow. "She thinks she can take my son," he muttered. What the document didn't say, what it didn't need to, was that Vincent could fight. He could drag this out, burn money, burn goodwill, burn what little credibility remained. But every page made one thing clear. If he crossed that line, everything else would follow. Investigations didn't need provocation. They needed opportunity. Vincent closed the file and stared up at the buildings towering above him. Manhattan had always rewarded bold men. Today, it felt indifferent. For the first time, Vincent wasn't calculating his next move. He was calculating what he could still afford to lose. And the answer frightened him. Vincent met Ethan 2 days later in a neutral room chosen by lawyers and softened with toys that felt like decorations rather than comfort. The table was low. The chairs were small. The walls were painted a color meant to calm children, but nothing about the space felt calm. Vincent arrived early, dressed carefully, posture straight, rehearsing apologies he had never practiced before. He told himself this was still salvageable. Children forgave easily. They forgot quickly. When the door opened, Savannah walked in first, steady and composed. Ethan followed, backpack on, eyes scanning the room as if measuring exits. He did not smile when he saw his father. Vincent's chest tightened. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "I've missed you." Ethan nodded once, but didn't move closer. Savannah took a seat a few steps away, close enough to protect, far enough to give space. She said nothing. They talked about school, about a science project, about a dog Ethan's friend had just gotten. Vincent clung to the normalcy like a lifeline, answering too eagerly, laughing a little too loudly. For 10 minutes, it almost worked. Then Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. "I brought you something," he said, sliding it across the table. "I know I've been gone, but—" Ethan didn't open it. He looked at the box, then up at his father, his expression serious in a way that made Vincent uncomfortable. "Are you going to leave again?" Ethan asked. The room went quiet. Vincent hesitated. He felt Savannah's presence sharpen, felt the weight of every promise he had broken press forward. "I don't plan to," he said carefully. "Things are just complicated right now." Ethan frowned. "You always say that." Vincent swallowed. "I'm trying," he said. Ethan's voice stayed calm. "Mom tries," he said simply. "She stays." The words were not angry. They were factual. That made them devastating. Vincent opened his mouth, but nothing came out. No explanation fit. No defense sounded right. "I waited," Ethan continued, his hands folded in his lap. "But I don't want to wait anymore." Savannah reached out and placed her hand over her son's. Not to silence him, to support him. Vincent felt something inside him collapse. Not his pride, not his anger, but the last illusion that he could talk his way back into being trusted. This wasn't a fight he could win. It was a truth he could only accept. And for the first time, Vincent understood that consequences didn't arrive loudly. They arrived quietly, in the voice of a child who had already moved on. Lila Monroe ended it on a quiet afternoon, not because she felt dramatic, but because clarity had finally replaced confusion. She sat alone in a sunlit cafe, her phone face up on the table, a half-finished coffee cooling beside it. For weeks, she had replayed conversations with Vincent in her head, testing them against what she now knew. The delayed payments, the half-truths, the way his voice changed when she asked direct questions. None of it felt accidental anymore. Vincent called while she was still staring at the screen. She answered, not warmly, not angrily, just neutral. "We need to talk," he said, skipping pleasantries. His tone carried urgency now, the kind that came when options narrowed. "We already are," Lila replied. There was a pause. "Things are complicated," Vincent began. Lila smiled faintly. She'd heard that phrase enough times to recognize it as an exit sign. "You used me," she said calmly, "for image, for access. For money you told me didn't matter." "That's not fair," Vincent snapped. "You knew what this was." "I knew what you said it was," Lila corrected. "I didn't know you were moving money through my contracts." Silence followed. Not denial, not surprise. That was her answer. "I've spoken to my lawyers," Lila continued, voice steady. "My name won't be attached to anything you're involved in again. And if anyone asks why, I'll tell the truth." Vincent exhaled sharply. "You think that won't hurt you?" "It already did," she said. "I'm just done letting it continue." She ended the call before he could respond. Lila sat back and felt something unexpected. Relief. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the freedom of stepping out of a story that was never really hers. She hadn't won anything. She had simply stopped losing. Across the city, Vincent stared at his phone, realization settling in piece by piece. The woman he thought was disposable had walked away cleanly. No scandal, no spectacle, just distance. And distance, he was learning, was dangerous. By the time Savannah heard about it, from her attorney, not the news, she felt no satisfaction. Lila's choice didn't change the outcome. It confirmed it. The illusion Vincent built his life on was collapsing from every side, not because anyone attacked it, but because no one was willing to hold it up anymore. And Savannah understood something important in that moment. Justice didn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrived when everyone finally chose themselves. The boardroom on Park Avenue had always favored Vincent. Floor-to-ceiling glass, polished wood, a skyline view that reminded everyone who held power in the room. For years, Vincent had sat at the head of that table, relaxed, authoritative, confident that whatever storms came would break somewhere below him. This time the room felt different. No one met his eyes when he entered. Conversations stopped too quickly. Chairs shifted not in greeting, but in discomfort. Vincent took his seat anyway, straightened his jacket, and placed his phone face down like a habit he no longer trusted. The managing partner cleared his throat. "Let's get started." The agenda moved fast, too fast. Vincent barely had time to frame a defense before the words risk, exposure, and temporary suspension began circulating like oxygen. "This is precautionary," someone said. "For the firm," another added, "until matters are clarified." Vincent leaned forward. "You're acting like I'm already guilty." A pause followed, heavy, calculated. "No," the compliance officer replied. "We're acting like we don't know what else we don't know." That was worse. A screen lit up at the far end of the room. Dates, transactions, entities. The same pattern Savannah had quietly mapped months ago now sat under fluorescent lights, stripped of context and excuses. Vincent felt the floor tilt, not because the information was new, but because it was no longer private. "We'll need you to step back temporarily," the managing partner said. "This protects everyone, including you," the unspoken part implied. Vincent opened his mouth to argue, to remind them who he was, what he'd built, but the words died there. Power depended on belief, and belief, once cracked, never returned the same. When the meeting ended, no one lingered to speak with him. No casual reassurance, no private promises. The elevator ride down felt longer than it ever had. Outside, Manhattan moved as if nothing had happened. Taxis honked, people rushed, empires fell quietly. Vincent checked his phone. 1 missed call from his attorney, 2 from his bank, none from Savannah. That silence hit hardest of all. Across the city, Savannah stood in a sunlit apartment near the park, watching Ethan build something on the floor with quiet concentration. She didn't know the details of the meeting. She didn't need to. She had done what she needed to do. The rest was momentum. For the first time, Vincent understood that this wasn't about punishment. It was about removal. And once a man like him was removed from the center of the room adjusted quickly, without regret. The new apartment didn't impress anyone. It wasn't a penthouse. It didn't overlook Fifth Avenue or glow with floor-to-ceiling glass. It sat on a quiet street near Central Park, high enough to catch afternoon light, modest enough to feel real. When Savannah unlocked the door for the first time, the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and something like possibility. Ethan ran ahead, shoes echoing on hardwood floors. "This one's mine," he announced, pointing to the smaller bedroom with the confidence of a child claiming safety. Savannah smiled, the tension in her chest loosening just a little. This space wasn't about winning. It was about choosing. Savannah unpacked slowly, deliberately. She placed books on shelves, folded clothes into drawers that no one else controlled, set her laptop on a simple desk by the window. Each object found its place without negotiation, without explanation. For years, every decision had required permission or compromise. Now, silence meant freedom. The first night, she and Ethan ate takeout on the floor. No table yet. No routine established. Just the quiet hum of the city outside and the comfort of being unobserved. "Do you like it?" Savannah asked. Ethan nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "It's calm," he said. "It doesn't feel like waiting." The words struck her deeper than she expected. Over the following days, Savannah rebuilt in small ways. Morning walks through the park, coffee from the same corner cafe, emails answered on her own schedule. She didn't rush to fill the emptiness. She let it breathe. Her attorney called once, updating her on procedural steps. Savannah listened, asked what mattered, and let the rest go. Vincent's situation was no longer the center of her story. It was background noise, fading. One afternoon, Savannah sat by the window watching Ethan ride his bike below. She realized something quietly profound. She wasn't afraid of the future anymore. Not because everything was resolved, not because life had become easy, but because her footing was her own. The constant calculation, what Vincent would think, how he would react, what he might take, was gone. That absence felt like relief, not loss. Savannah closed her eyes and let the sunlight warm her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't bracing for impact. She was present. And whatever came next, love, work, healing, would arrive not as compensation for pain, but as something she could finally accept without fear. This wasn't an escape. It was arrival. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, in ordinary moments Savannah hadn't realized she'd missed. It showed up in the mornings first. She woke before Ethan, not from anxiety, but from habit. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel threatening. She brewed coffee and sat by the window with her laptop open, not to monitor accounts or track damage, but to read. Sometimes it was work-related articles. Other times it was a few pages from a book she'd ordered on impulse, delivered in a plain cardboard box that felt like a promise rather than a burden. Ethan adjusted too, in his own careful way. He slept through the night. He laughed more easily. He stopped asking questions that had no answers. On weekends, they walked through Central Park, counting dogs, sharing pastries from a small cafe, building routines that belonged only to them. Savannah noticed the change in herself one afternoon while waiting for Ethan outside a friend's apartment. She realized she wasn't scanning her phone. She wasn't bracing for a message, a threat, or an apology she didn't want. The constant vigilance had faded, leaving space behind. Work returned gradually, not in the way it used to, no corner office, no endless meetings, but through referrals, quiet calls from women who needed someone to explain financial language without judgment. Savannah listened more than she spoke. She understood fear now, not as a concept, but as a lived thing. One evening, after a long walk, Ethan asked, "Are you happy, Mom?" The question surprised her. Savannah thought carefully before answering. "I'm getting there," she said honestly. Ethan smiled, satisfied with that. Later that night, Savannah sat alone on the couch, the city humming softly beyond the glass. She thought about the life she had fought to preserve and the one she was building now. They weren't the same, and that was the point. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. Healing, she was learning, wasn't about erasing pain. It was about no longer organizing your life around it, about choosing what deserved your attention and letting the rest fall away. Savannah closed her eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the solid weight of the present moment. For the first time, she wasn't healing in order to survive. She was healing because she finally could. And that, she knew, was the beginning of something lasting. Vincent stood alone in the penthouse long after the city lights came on. The space was exactly as he had left it, polished floors, carefully chosen art, glass walls framing the Manhattan skyline like a reward he had once believed was permanent. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, everything echoed. He poured a drink and didn't sit down. There was nowhere that felt like it belonged to him anymore. The phone on the counter remained silent. No calls from partners, no messages from Savannah. No updates that offered leverage or reassurance. Just quiet, stretching longer than he expected, pressing against him in a way no confrontation ever had. Vincent walked through the apartment slowly, touching the back of a chair, the edge of the counter, as if physical contact might confirm ownership. In the bedroom, Savannah's side of the closet was empty, not hastily cleared, not angry, just gone. The absence felt deliberate, almost respectful. That somehow made it worse. He sat on the edge of the bed and tried to reconstruct the moment everything turned. The night he left. The assumption that distance meant power. the belief that he could return and reset the board whenever he chose. Men like Vincent were raised to believe consequences came loudly: lawsuits, headlines, humiliation. He had prepared for those. He hadn't prepared for irrelevance. The firm had moved on faster than he imagined. Meetings rescheduled without him, decisions made in rooms he no longer entered. His name still carried weight, but not authority. There was a difference. He felt it now. Vincent opened his laptop and stared at numbers that once obeyed him. They no longer did. Restrictions blinked back at him, impersonal and final. For the first time in his career, money wasn't a solution. It was a reminder. He thought of Ethan. Not the child waiting by the door, but the boy who had said he didn't want to wait anymore. That sentence replayed itself without mercy. Vincent understood then that losing Savannah was not the deepest loss he'd suffered. It was losing the right to be believed. Outside, the city continued, indifferent as ever. Vincent finished his drink and set the glass down untouched by satisfaction. The penthouse felt larger than it ever had, emptier than he thought possible. This wasn't punishment. It was the aftermath. And for the first time, Vincent had nowhere to redirect the blame but inward, where it settled quietly, with no one left to absorb it for him. The afternoon light filtered softly through the trees in Central Park, turning the path ahead into something almost golden. Savannah walked beside Ethan at an unhurried pace, her hands tucked into the pockets of a light coat, her thoughts finally quiet enough to hear herself think. This was not the life she had planned. And yet, it was the one that fit. Ethan rode a few steps ahead on his bike, circling back every so often, just to make sure she was still there. He always checked now, not out of fear, but out of habit formed by safety. Savannah watched him, her chest tightening with a feeling that no longer hurt. They reached a small clearing near the water, where a familiar figure waited. Dr. Adrian Keller stood up as they approached, offering Ethan a warm smile before crouching to listen to an excited story about school. He listened the way Savannah had noticed from the beginning, fully, without distraction, without impatience. Adrian had entered their lives quietly, as a recommendation, as a conversation, as a presence that never pushed. He had cared about Ethan first, understanding that trust wasn't something you requested. It was something you earned. Savannah hadn't been looking for love. That was why it found her gently. They sat together on a bench, Ethan occupied nearby with a notebook and crayons Adrian had brought without ceremony. The city hummed in the distance, present but no longer intrusive. "I was thinking," Adrian said after a moment, his voice calm, certain without being forceful. "Not about rushing anything, just about building something steady. With you, with Ethan. If you're open to it." Savannah looked at him, really looked, and felt no need to guard herself. No fear of being measured or controlled. No sense of debt. "I am," she said simply. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, not extravagant, not symbolic of status, but thoughtful, intentional, real. Ethan looked up, eyes wide. "Is this a good thing?" he asked. Savannah smiled and held her son close. "It is," she said, "because no one is leaving." The ring slid onto her finger with ease. Across the city, Vincent's world had narrowed into something small and silent. But here, on a park bench surrounded by ordinary joy, Savannah felt something expand. Not triumph, completion. She had been repaid not with revenge, but with peace. Not with loss restored, but with something better built in its place. And as the light shifted and Ethan laughed, Savannah understood the truth at last. The ending she deserved was never about what she took back. It was about what she finally allowed herself to receive. So, the story ends here. And if you're still with us at this moment, that tells me something important. It means something in this story touched you. Maybe a memory, maybe a fear you never said out loud, maybe a quiet hope you've been carrying for a long time. What this story reminds us is simple, but not easy. Silence is not weakness, and walking away is not failure. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Savannah didn't heal by controlling others. She healed by reclaiming herself. She stopped waiting. She stopped explaining. And in doing so, she found peace, not through revenge, but through clarity. Life doesn't always reward us immediately when we do the right thing. Sometimes it feels unfair. Sometimes it feels lonely. But as the Stoics believed, virtue is its own reward. When you choose dignity over chaos, truth over comfort, you slowly build a life that no one can take from you. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like it, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, not just entertain. And remember, if you stayed until the end, you're not here by accident. Something in you is ready to grow.